There we go. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Burning Desire Show. And today I have David Soffer. I pronounced your surname correctly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I should have normally checked that before, but I didn't.
No, that's all
How do we come across each other? LinkedIn or something, possibly?
right. LinkedIn or Facebook, one or the other.
Yeah. And then I don't know
Geography.
how we were talking about watches and different things, and I kind of realized that you'd had something really interesting, which is we'll come to in a minute, but which is TechRound, and some other bits and pieces as well. So I always like to start kind of like people's education, their upbringing, like try and figure out what impacted them to get to where they are today, you know?
Yeah.
So having a little route around, it seems that you were very scientifically minded, right? A
I
level,
was. I was indeed. I got BBC,
right?
and I actually ironically wanted to work for the BBC because I wanted to get into radio. And I started by doing my A levels, taking a gap year, then going to university doing biomedical science to
Yeah.
be initially to be a doctor, because all the failed doctors go to study biomedical science. So it was me
Right.
and it was me, a bunch of other failed doctors and other people who loved the subject.
So
Doing
what
it.
is biomedical science? Like, what is the study?
So biomedical science is mainly the study of disease, and it's kind of medicine without the practice. So, for example, if a doctor requests a test from a patient for whatever reason, that test will normally get done and then analyzed and assessed and reported by a biomedical scientist. But it's also a good route for people into research and also into medicine. So I wanted to go into medicine. My particular interests are actually in orthopedics and oncology, so bones and cancer. Um, but then, sort of, some point in my first year of university, I realized I had a love for radio. So started doing a hospital radio at Northwick Park, which I did for probably for about 5 years, probably I reckon. But I started my first year, and then I started hammering on every radio station's door, trying to get work experience. And the only ones that would speak to me very randomly were BBC Radio 1 and Kiss. So
Wow.
so so Kiss I went to some thing, and I kind of went to some like tryout thing. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I went to some kind of like tryout thing. And it was in Westfield, actually, if I remember. And I wasn't suitable, so I was like, okay. And then BBC Radio 1, I saw the BBC had a very BBC way of doing things, whereby you can't just ask for the work experience. Like, you have to go through some processes and this and equal this and everyone that. But I thought, you know what? Forget that. And I spent a few hours actually researching who's who at the BBC, and then specifically at BBC Radio and Radio 1. Found a list of probably about 50 people, I reckon, who I was like, well, they look like something, from a guy in like HR to another guy who was like the controller at the time to producers. Anyway, turned out the HR guy and the guy, I think was I think he was the controller of Radio 1 at the time, both got back to me, and they both said, yeah, let's meet you. So I separately went in without the other one knowing that, because you're only allowed to have a certain number of days or something. But anyway, I went in, met one, and then about 2 weeks later went in and met the other one. And then they both were like, yeah, sure, okay, and we'll give you like a week each or something. So I was like, okay, cool. So I made sure, I was like, well, I can't ask for the same radio show. Big fan of Scott Mills. So I was like, I can't ask for 2 weeks there, because I'll realize and I'll get in trouble.
Yep.
So I said to the HR guy, I said, yeah, I like, there was some late night, sort of like, I think about 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the evening they started. I was like, I like them. It was Phil Taggart and Alice Levine. So I said, I quite like them. And I did like them. I was like, okay, let's go do that. So he sent me there. And the other one, I said, yeah, I love Scott Mills. So I went Scott Mills for it. And then that went very well. And then I found out, and all the time I was doing my hospital radio, and then I found out that actually they used to have these like comedy evenings at Radio 1 you could apply to go to with all these up and coming comedians. So I kept applying, and I kept getting yes. I kept getting through. I don't know what happened. And there were good comedians like Romesh Ranganathan and some other comedians who are now quite big.
Yeah.
Saw them, and on their YouTube channel, I'm still there in like 15 different recordings. You see me in the audience because I'm just there every time, bringing a different friend with me every single time. And And then through that, I also said, oh, do you know, actually, I'd like to shadow this other radio show, whatever, to someone I saw then. They're like, okay, cool. So I got like another few days there. So I just kind of hustled my way to a few different random days. They obviously wouldn't give me a job, but I was like, okay, it's a good experience. And then, that was kind of that. Then I did some more internships at some other sort of creative places that were actually, ironically, were creating content for the BBC and places. So got into like Radio 2, which was different.
You like one of the things I think is interesting, because like a lot of people think, I've got a passion for whatever it is, right? F1, for example, right? Like how do I, even approach that? So like, what did you mentioned these 50 names? Where did you get them from? Did you trawl through LinkedIn? Like
so,
what was the process?
Yeah, so I initially I just started with Google. And I literally was like BBC Radio 1 producers, BBC Radio 1,
Okay.
whatever. Then I looked at like Wikipedia and I looked at I went really deep into this. I went on Wikipedia and I was looking at like, let's say each radio show, because I knew the schedule at the time. I knew the breakfast show was this, the late morning was this. So I literally researched for each show, who's the producers, who's in charge, who's involved. You can find it all online. And I was like, okay. And then I'd reach out to all of them. And then I was like, well, okay, what's above that? And I'd research in terms of radio station, what's above that? And it's like, right, there's producers, and then there's like executive producers, and then there's like something else. And eventually you get to like the controller. So you kind of build this weird, like, if I was really strange, I would have had like pictures on my wall with strings between them. So I kind of built that. And then, just this persistence. I remember met them, and I remember when I met this controller, I was interning down the road, just near Oxford Street, at a media company. It was like a magazine or something.
Yeah.
And I remember this, like, yeah, we'd like you to come in. So I said to the internship I was on, I was like, oh, I forgot I got this like doctor's appointment or something. So I'm gonna go for like 3 hours or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Went down the road to the BBC, went in, and all the rest of it. So it's just, you just kind of keep knocking, as they say. And then after that, did that for a while, and then realized, well, actually, there's a mixture of, I think, my mum telling me that, listen, it might not work, and actually you're gonna have to find a plan B. And my dad saying, no, just keep going, it might work. So I then decided, I've got to find something in between. So I actually, very strange, I put a LinkedIn post out just saying, this is already now towards the end, or even at the end of university. I think I just graduated. I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to do something that wasn't actually medicine.
When was the radio piece? Was that during university or after?
Yeah, so that was, I'd say, between my first year. It was quite a few, and also some like random days here and there. So it's basically between like my second year and my third year.
Okay.
I did that, and then after I graduated, there was a company called Wise Buddha, which was a very good company, also based down over the BBC. And I was like, this would be a good way to the BBC, because that's who they work with.
Right.
So I did stuff there, and they were working with like Magic and like Radio 2, and a bit more of a mature audience, but all the same.
Mm-hmm.
So did that as well. And then I put out a LinkedIn post around that time, just saying, yeah, they're looking for jobs in like digital media or something. And someone I knew from school just randomly saw it, and he had seen someone else put a post. This other person was working for a startup, and they had put out looking for someone to do also digital media or digital marketing or something. So you kind of just matched the two together. I didn't know. I knew the guy from school. I didn't know the other guy introduced me to.
Okay.
He made the intro. I was like, okay, cool. Got interviewed by the startup by the founder, whatever. Got the job there. Worked there for a while.
What did they do?
So they were a fintech startup. They didn't work out in the end, but they were some very impressive people behind it, who, to be honest, still do very well, and are still I'm still in touch with them.
Okay.
So that was very good experience. And interestingly, the person who I was randomly introed to, who then kind of like sort of brought me in to then speak to the boss. So I then got the job, and then it was the same person who I ended up working with at that company doing SEO, search engine optimization, which I knew somewhat, at the time I knew a little bit of. So we worked together for about 6-7 months. Our contracts then were coming to an end. We didn't know each other really. We sort of just met over that period of time. I was going in there probably about 3 times a week, and he was, I think, doing the same thing. And we kind of said to each other, hey, do you know what? We're doing quite well here. Why don't we start something up together? And we literally did. And that's where the kind of initial SEO business was born, by me meeting this guy. We didn't know each other. Literally, I don't think our paths would ever have crossed actually in life had that not happened. We don't live that far away from each other, probably about half an hour away. But yeah, to this day we're in touch and we do business together. So it's quite funny how these things work out. And
Sure. You know, my favorite quote, I bring this up a lot on these podcasts. One of many quotes that I love, but it's a Steve Jobs one, which is you've epitomized, which is literally you can't connect the dots going forwards, only backwards. So now it's pretty obvious why and how you came across this fellow, but you never at that point would have thought you'd be where you are now in the relationship.
And we were business partners for quite a while. 7-8 years.
Wow.
Very, very close, business partners. We still do business to this day. There's nothing weird. But and then we had TechRound was obviously born as well. So TechRound was the other kind of thing that was born in 20. So we started about 2015. TechRound was about 2016. Really, it was just something that we thought, you know what, it was quite a nice. I remember coming up with a name in my bedroom. We're looking at tech this, we saw like TechCrunch, there was like Wired. We're like, well, what name? I don't know. And I was thinking, I like writing down, I saw the piece of paper the other week actually. So I was writing down all these random names. I was like, TechRound. They were like, well, there's some company in like India that sold like photocopiers or something. I was like, well,
This
like,
is funny enough when I have this same thing. So when I tag Watch Marketplace in a post on LinkedIn, there's Watch Marketplace something in the Philippines. It's hilarious. I like almost press it every time by accident.
So yeah, I mean, that's basically it. What happened, and we're like, okay, let's kind of do this. I think the site was initially built for like, I don't know, in the hundreds of pounds. It was a very cheap site.
Just reversing a touch. So you've done all this SEO with your business partner.
So
what led you to then TechRound though?
Yeah, so we've been doing SEO for probably about a year and a bit, year and a half.
What sort of people? What sort of companies?
We'd worked for, well, I mean, when we started, it was very much a case of family, friends, just getting any business, just saying yes to everything.
Yeah.
Kind of what you shouldn't do as you progress in business. We just did. We're like, yes, anyone comes in, you want to spend £100 a month? Yes. like I don't care. I don't care if I lose out. Like, yes. So there was a point where I was working with some like, some people didn't end up paying, and it's all part of it, annoyingly. But I remember the first company that I ever got as like a client was one of the first. They arranged very niche events, like football themed events and sports themed events. It's very niche, but like, it was fine. They gave me a shot. They did actually quite well. The rest of it did very well. But family, friends, some of them, to be honest, are still clients to this day, which is quite cool. But so just really building up like that. Then on the TechRound front, we really just thought, well, we both wanted something like on the side that wasn't purely giving SEO to clients, providing SEO to clients. And we saw like publications around, and then we like had a lot of exposure to startups, just because those were the kinds of people often that I'd entertain taking. At the time I was 23, and so my business partner at the time was about 25. So we were young guys, and you were blagging things a bit as well. So the only people that would really buy into that and would really take two young guys like that were start some big companies. We worked with some really big companies, and one of them that was very good was Savills, who we worked with very early on. And we got access to some very senior people there who are lovely. So that was quite refreshing. But generally, it was startup. So because of that, it was kind of like, well, okay, let's start something up. Well, look, there's not really that much around for startups. You kind of have Wired, TechCrunch. Those were kind of the main ones. I'm not sure if Sifted were even around then.
No, they're relatively new.
So we're like, okay, well, startup. So we kind of did it. TechRound. If you look at TechRound on like way back when machine online, you can see what it used to look like. It looked like a real like just blog. And we'd have some days where we would just say to each other, oh, nothing's gone on the site for like 4 days. Should we just spend a day and write on it? So we would just write stuff and do stuff, and then we just consistently did that, doing SEO to the site and pushing SEO and all the rest of it as we're building the SEO business as well. And then it came to a point in about 2019. I said, 2019, we looked at it and we're like, there's about 3,000 people a month reading this somehow. We're ranking for different things, and people are finding it. We're referring it to people and family, friends and stuff as well. But one way or the other, people are reading it. So why don't we like build this? Like, well, let's make this into a thing, because Sifted were around by this point, I think. And we thought, we're not viewing anyone's competition, really. It's just all these other companies, TechCrunch are owned by Verizon. Wired owned by Condé Nast, and Sifted are kind of the FT's startup branch. So like all of these like big companies, not looking to compete with anyone. Let's just have something like, independent and small and who knows. So we invested in it ourselves. The SEO thing was growing at the time. So, we just sort of started to kind of, I think, take off in a nice way. So invested in it, got a bit of staff going and all the rest of it. And all this time, we're all working from home. Before it was cool to work from home. We're all doing it. And then that was 2019. You fast forward to now, it was like, that was about 3,000-ish, probably a bit less readers. And now it's kind of between about 130 and 300,000 per month, which obviously is nice. But interestingly, just through doing it properly, interviewing startups, speaking to everyone, not just speaking to kind of your Ubers and Deliveroos, as great as they are, but really doing, I think, what no one else does, in the sense of telling the story of real, I say real startups, but of, companies of all sorts. So, it's actually served us very well, in the sense that TechRound now is, I can call it cautiously and kind of bit coy, I would say, is one of the sort of, eminent publications for startups in the UK. And, I've been flown so far to Iceland and Israel for TechRound, which was, both were interesting in their own way. I've spoken at an event with some very interesting people with the government of Dubai. I remember meeting some people, I think it was like head of Toyota Europe. We went to the Langham Hotel. They just invited us in just randomly. They like emailed me and they're like, we'd like to meet you. And I was like, this must be a con. And then it turned out it wasn't. And these people were actually very, very senior and like very, I think one of them, I only recently chucked out their business cards, but I think one of them was like head of Toyota Europe. And the other one was something else really senior. Like they knew Mr. Toyota in Japan. And I was like, that's really cool. So we met them. Nothing, not that much came of that. We published some stuff and did a bit with them. But, it was just interesting at the time. But then, over the course of time, we've had some huge brands work with us. But what's really cool is actually the startups. Like you name a startup, they've probably emailed us. They've probably been featured by us. We've probably done something with them. And I mean, people have gone on from being on TechRound over the years. People have gone on to national press, which, I know, having spoken to some journalists at various national press publication things, they use TechRound as a source of research when they're looking at startups and things, which is really interesting. But also the big companies that want access to the startup market, they're looking at sort of niche publications like TechRound now. So anyone we worked with, for example, done stuff with like Amazon, with AXA, with Peloton, with Oracle, with some really good, really big brands, Uber, and these companies all kind of want a piece of the startup market. So TechRound's been really, it's been very interesting because when it started, we never actually thought that's what it would become. But here we are.
That's awesome. That's absolutely awesome. And what's the kind of the future looking like, or you just kind of take as it goes? Or have you got a plan as to like, are you a goal setter that goes, right, I'd love it to get to 500,000 visitors, 1 million visitors, or do you just try and just produce the best product possible and then like see what happens?
Yeah, so it's always been quality over quantity. So the SEO business is still going. That's still great. Still got great clients. Still work with great clients, and that's still going. On the TechRound side, it's always been quality over quantity in the sense of, from an SEO perspective, we could, in theory, and from a digital marketing perspective, could in theory drive traffic in general to the site and really beef up the numbers. But we've always been, and like I've always been very clear that it's quality over quantity in the sense that we're building an offering and a brand and something that I think offers, true value to people, whether it's guides that, we're writing for startups and things, to interviews, to all sorts of things. It's becoming a very good place to be. And the interesting thing is, I remember the kind of meetings I'd be invited to, or what people would contact me for through TechRound, used to be almost entirely startup founders, like new startup founders. And I met loads of them, of random companies. Some of them actually are now really big companies, but I remember meeting them in, all sorts of places. Whereas now it's, people sometimes get in touch and they they're like, oh, I know you've got a team of like 25 people, but, and it's like, we actually don't. It's a team of about 5 people. It's not, it doesn't necessarily need to be that massive team. So I think really it's quality over quantity. And what I'm sort of looking at, what TechRound will hopefully continue doing, is offering quality, still being seen as that place. It's like, the place, if you like, for startups, building the brand, building the audience, building what we can, give and provide to people. And so, I mean, ultimately it's going to be growth of audience, growth of everything. And, just keep it going. We've never got investment, never got it, just because the startup world is very heavy on investment, which is fine, which is good for startups that need it. But when you don't need it, you don't need it. So, so it's interesting. We'll see where TechRound goes and where it takes me.
I think it's a more concise podcast than I'm used to, but I think it was like a nice kind of, where have you started, where you are. And again, I think it's a kind of testament to your character of kind of from the radio stuff and the hustle and trying to figure stuff out.
Yeah.
They get you to here, and I'm sure in 5 years you'll be doing something either with TechRound or whatever, and you'll be like, how on earth did he get to that position? Because I'm sure 5 years ago, if I'd have told you TechRound would be where it is now, probably wouldn't have believed that, right? When he just started out, was it? Let's see what happens.
Yeah, probably not. No, definitely not. Really not. It was very much just like a little project. I didn't think TechRound would ever have people working for it. I didn't think that TechRound would ever have the name that it has now, and the kind of draw to it that it has now.
Well, the beauty of it is, I think, is that the story of TechRound in itself is a startup success story.
Correct. Yeah.
And I think it's a really beautiful story because it indicates, I think, because I've gone through the tech world and backwards and forwards, looking for investment, not this. I think people are obsessed with numbers, investment, taking on this, taking that. And actually, sometimes, as you've proved, slow and steady wins the race. And now you're in a much stronger position than you would be if you took investment 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think so. I think, and we actually always say is we do these like top lists for this and top 100, TechRound 100 and different industries do different kind of ranked companies in there. And what we always say is that funding alone is not a factor. It's not something that would make you successful or not, because it's possible that you could get funding and fail, or someone could get no funding and massively succeed. And
yes.
So although funding's great, it's not in and of itself. It's not. I don't think it's quite controversial in startups, but that's not in and of itself a measure of success.
You know what it probably equates to in a personal sense. It's like getting a university degree. Like if you have a university degree in something, it may well lead you on to being more successful.
Yeah.
But it's not the be all and end all. Like it also might be a hindrance in some respects. So
yeah, exactly. And just like a university degree where you're kind of, you're saying, right, this is the direction I want to take. I did biomedical science, I only use that to a limited extent nowadays. But I think funding is the same. You could get it, and like you say, it could actually end up being not the right thing for you. But once you're committed, you're committed. So, for me, for example, where my biomedical science is used is ironically, I also started up a health startup.
Is this GlobeMed?
That is GlobeMed, exactly. So GlobeMed is where my medical knowledge now goes. The medical.
And what is that? What is that?
Pardon?
What is GlobeMed? I saw a briefing about it.
So GlobeMed was founded by myself and a different partner about 2 years ago now. The premise of GlobeMed is quite simply to give people access to private healthcare without needing insurance, and giving them access to private healthcare when they need it. Essentially, the UK health system, even pre-COVID, but definitely post-COVID, is for people to access healthcare is extremely difficult, sometimes impossible. So your choices either are, in many cases, wait a very long time, might be in pain. If it's something like cancer, every day makes a difference, or go down the private route. If you've got private insurance, fine. If you don't, you might be stuck. And equally, even if you have private insurance, they may not cover you. So essentially what we're offering is self-pay healthcare. So, we have a network of, it's approaching about 10,000 doctors and health providers, etc., across the UK and Europe. And ultimately, we have good arrangements with them. So, the whole idea is you don't pay a penny more with GlobeMed than you do if you go direct. But with GlobeMed, you're covered for liabilities and all sorts of different things. But we can then assess you, and then within our network, which is constantly being built, we can, you know, send you to the place that would be best for you. And what makes it quite interesting is that we're not tied to a specific healthcare service or a specific clinic. So it's like there's like a no conflict of interest thing there, whereby we have no particular interest to send you to one place or the other. All that's in our interest is our name's on the line. So we want to send you someone that's going to actually solve your problem. So that's GlobeMed.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, buddy. Well, I fascinated by the story. That's why I wanted to get you on. And I look forward to seeing like where you take TechRound, GlobeMed, and I'm sure there'll be other things given what you're talking about. You're kind of always looking at different avenues, right? To kind of be entrepreneurial, creative, solve problems, and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you know, it's life is a funny thing. Life is a very funny thing, and you know, one thing often leads to another. And I think the lesson I think I've learned is I think when, you know, take TechRound or take something else, and it comes back to that Steve Jobs quote thing you kind of said, similar to that. I think as long as you don't burn bridges with anyone along the way, because I think it's easy for people to do that when you see one thing taking off or one thing not. It's quite easy to burn bridges with people. There's never really a reason to burn those bridges. And it is very much true that you never know when you'll cross paths with people. And I've seen that, you know, it's happened to me a few times now. And I thought, oh, thank goodness I didn't slag them off, or, you know, actually we're all right now. So I would say that's a very good lesson. You never know when you're navigating an industry or a particular sector or particular anything.
I agree.
I think it's very important. And I think, you know, being kind to people and being nice to people in business is no bad thing.
Well, that's a lovely place to round the conversation. And yeah, look forward to seeing where you go from here. And thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.